We have heard many pieces of information that are of absolute discredit to the Bahraini regime. We've heard about killings, we've heard about torturings, repression, and all kinds of revelations. So that in itself is a positive step forward that has happened. But I think it does really open the wider question as to whether the government that has commissioned such a piece is really willing to address all the systemic problems that report reveals, and also to go wider than that and to really address the concerns that the protesters were actually raising in the first instance, issues of democracy.
It's very interesting. If I can go to you, Mitchell, was this report written for external consumption? Was it written for Europe? Was it written for the Americans? Because there's negotiations going on with the royal family of Bahrain in the United States for a $53 million military aid bill that's going through Congress. I mean, quite a few things like that. It's very coincidental, because if the recommendations, and there seems to be no mechanism within the report to make sure that these recommendations of reconciliation are brought about. I mean, democratizing the country, for example.
Well, I would say, for example, that it was not made for Western consumption at all. In fact, we can see that the royal family and the Al Khalifa family has been attempting since 2002 really to bridge the gaps between the different segments of society. There's been calls for national dialogue. There's been attempts at constructing a more, I think, a widespread consensus over how Bahrain should proceed into the future. That doesn't mean that all at once, all the reforms, not only that the report has stressed, but also the reforms that the regime has been attempting to push forward, will magically appear and, will very easily be, let's say, adopted by society. But I think that the report, and I think the Al Khalifas in general, are very keen on really building a national dialogue and bringing all segments of society together in a legitimate manner.
What do you think about that, Peter, in Birmingham? I mean, we had have the Saudi troops come in, quote-unquote, invited in to keep the peace there. I mean, how can you have some kind of reconciliation when you have a gun to your head? I mean, basically, and then you blame it all on Iran, okay? The report didn't say that, and then right after the report says, we don't see any connection with Iran, and then the royal family said, but, well, we still think there was. I mean, what's that report mean then? If they say they accept the report, but they don't accept all of the report?
I personally think the report has been doctored somewhat, Peter, as you get all around the world with reports and these inquiries that really clear the instigators of the problem of any wrongdoing. There is no democracy in Bahrain. As you rightfully said, 3/4 of the population are Shiite. And then in the government, they're a minority. Most of the work goes to non-Shiite workers. Those that are working are, in some cases, in acute poverty. And then you've got this very elitist group, including the very rich royal family, who have, on average, I think it's 5,200 rich people in Bahrain with an income averaging about $4.2 million. You times that by 5,200, that's an awful lot of money. So there's this disparity, this imbalance. There is no democracy. Even with their religious beliefs, they've had many of their mosques destroyed because the government claim they didn't fulfill the correct license. And so it goes on. This is not democracy.
Kate,
if I could just join
go
in
ahead,
for
Mitchell,
a second.
go ahead. This is Crosstalk. Jump in right ahead. Go ahead.
Just by way of response, I would suggest that we shouldn't summarize the Shiite community of Bahrain as being one. There are many different groups of Shiites, as the report itself has indicated, and some of those groups are, let's say, closer with the regime, closer with the Al Khalifas, and others are in opposition. So I don't know if this is really a case of one religious group kind of polarized against the other group. I think that this is a bit of an exaggeration.
Okay, Kate, I'd like to go to you. Maybe the conflict has actually made it more polarized. I'd like to read the response from the Americans and from the European Union to this report here. The White House said it's incumbent upon the government of Bahrain to hold accountable those responsible for human rights violations and put in place institutional changes to ensure that such abuses do not happen again. And then Catherine Ashton had to say that the Bahraini authorities should open a new chapter of national reconciliation, and all the while they're saying that the regime in Syria should disappear, it should collapse itself. And I'm not going to say the scale of violence is the same, but at the same time there's a level of hypocrisy here, is they're giving a free pass to Bahrain for what they do to their people, but they will certainly not give a free pass to Syria. It's hypocrisy.
Well, I think there does appear to be a certain element of double standards here. And I think what some critics have observed about this report is really it gives the ruling group the opportunity to kind of put a sticking plaster on the problem somehow and say that they are the people who can provide the way forward towards a fair and democratic Bahrain. And given their record, I think there are very, very serious questions over whether that's possible. I mean, just to produce a report, which does reveal many crimes and misdemeanours, but whether they can then be the people who can pave the way forward to a democratic Bahrain when they have been guilty of those kinds of episodes, I think is a very, very serious question.
Okay, Peter, if I can go back to you. I mean, do you think the Bahraini authorities would accept a one-person, one-vote system there? Because then the royal family would just be voted out of power. I mean, they're such a small minority of the population, and this is one of the biggest differences that we have here. And speaking of democracy, it's just really utter nonsense. And maybe that's for Fox TV consumption, but it's certainly not for the consumption of the vast majority of people that live in that tiny country.
I don't think that's possible. There will never be a fair voting system in most of the Islamic countries. Talking about the Arab Spring, you've got to understand that Bahrain is just part of the total Arab Spring. We saw Tunisia, Algeria. Not a lot was said there. And then, of course, we had Libya. You know what happened there. There was a total regime change and an unjust war took place. We saw a year ago almost now that the turmoil in Egypt, which is now returning, no democracy there. Obviously, the Americans or the West are waiting for a Western-friendly government to be imposed. And this, of course, sucks up to the Israeli situation so that the border with Gaza is controlled by the West and by Israel. So there's lots of problems. And even the small country of Kuwait has got a very hidden agenda there, which we're not actually seeing in the media yet. And, of course, the whole thing in Syria. We've got another potential Libya coming up here, and plans are afoot already in the Arab countries to impose a no-fly zone over Syria. Where is this going to stop?
What do you think about
But isn't the issue surely, the just aspirations of the Arab peoples? I mean, the previous speaker was talking about, you know, the lack of democracy. There'd been an uprising in Egypt, and then it had been clamped down. There was no democracy there. I mean, these developments are part of a process, and I believe that it is an inexorable process in which ultimately the Arab peoples will achieve the democracy that they aspire to. But it's incumbent upon the international community not to back authoritarian states and not to back hereditary royal systems. They have to be encouraging those states to move towards a democratic process. The peoples of the Middle East and the peoples of North Africa deserve democracy no less than the peoples of Europe and North America.
Okay, Mitchell, if I can just echo what Kate was just saying there, is that everyone should have the right to democracy except for the Palestinians and the people of Bahrain, okay? Because these are national security issues of the United States of America, and just so what, okay? National interests are far more important than values, because that's what we have seen since the beginning of the Arab Spring.
Well, it's hard, firstly...
and I should throw in Saudi Arabia. I should throw in Saudi Arabia as well, sorry.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I should probably point out that this idea of a wide Arab Spring is a bit of an exaggeration, considering that even in Bahrain or in any of the situations in which civil, let's say, segments of a society have risen up and demanded some kind of civil rights, it's very local. Their demands are local. Their demands are not about necessarily democracy as such, although the democratic process would assist them in achieving their other objectives, such as jobs or housing in the case of Bahrain. When it comes to national security agenda of the West, I would say that it would also be a bit rich to suggest that the Western states are somehow this kind of overpowering force at playing a giant game of chess in the Middle East. The Middle East has been a penetrated region.
Centuries.
Yeah, but not just the West, huh? Almost every country has been doing it in the Middle East. The Middle East is a penetrated region.
No,
it's always been a penetrated region.
All right, we're going to continue with international relations when we return from a break. After that break, we'll continue our discussion on Bahrain. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the political turbulence in Bahrain. Okay, Kate, I'd like to go back to you in London. Here on Crosstalk, we've been covering the end of the Western neo-colonial projects in the Arab world since it all started back in Tunisia.
Not
but you know,
the end yet,
oh no, I think we got a long way to go. As a matter of fact, I think as it's been pointed out, we're going to get just more friendly militaries to the United States. But that's not what this program is about, particularly.
Our Prime Minister suggested that his success, as he considers it in Libya, actually indicates that the way forward now is for more interventions.
Okay, well, good. I'm sure we'll learn more. The Western world will learn how to say the word mujahideen again, I'm pretty sure, too. But let's stay on point here. Kate, Iran has been brought up a lot here, and this is a real boogeyman that's being played here because of the sectarian difference in Bahrain here. The original report didn't mention, or actually dismissed that Iranian meddling inside the protest movement earlier in this year. But the royal family continues to do that. And it's very interesting how this report comes out when there is this whole drumbeat to war against Iran with the Israelis and members of the American political establishment here. I mean, unfortunately for the people of Bahrain, they're still very much a pawn in this game.
Well, yes, we read that with interest over here, that the report indicated that there was not Iranian intervention there, but that the king blamed it on Iranian intervention. I mean, obviously, we have no prior knowledge here in Britain about what's been taking place, but it seems, if you look at the situation absolutely objectively, there's more than enough for the Bahraini people to protest about within their own country of their own volition without any kind of external intervention. And I think that has to be the fundamental principle. One can speculate. And, of course, as you said, there is the wider project from some elements of the Western world to ratchet up the pressure against Iran around the Iranian nuclear project. So I think one has to look very carefully at those things and not just make wild assumptions about them.
Peter, in Birmingham, what do you think about the Saudi role in all of this vis-a-vis Iran here? Because this is one of the primary reasons that, obviously, that Saudi Arabia sent in forces. Is it because it saw the Bahrain as being a very weak link because it borders on Saudi Arabia itself? As we go to do this program here, the police are starting an investigation into some violence in Saudi Arabia that is directly related to what was going on in Bahrain. I mean, they see this as a contingent, okay? And they see Iran everywhere, okay? And this is why this report came out, to whitewash the regime, to clean the hands of the Saudis for their military intervention, proxy intervention for the West in Bahrain.
Well, the first thing I'd like to point out is if Iran is involved, which is a very good indication that there is, so what? I'm sure that balances out equally with the Western involvement with Bahrain, with the Saudis' involvement, with the Kuwaitis' involvement. It's all a one-sided game here, and I see a situation where America, for instance, has got its Fifth Fleet based in Bahrain. Obviously, they need to protect that, and it's in Saudi's interest to keep the Shiites at bay. And, of course, the majority of Shiites are in Iran, and the same situation in Yemen. It's all part and parcel of the same game. It's a sort of an East versus West, and the Arabic Western-friendly countries against those that have a little bit more independence, like Syria and Libya of late. So it's all part of a geopolitical plan. You've got to understand that this Arab Spring, the financial collapse of everywhere in the world, was an intentional plan by what I call the New World Order. It was pre-planned in 1991. I have evidence of that by Paul Wolfowitz, which was met with General Clark, the ex-Supreme Commander of Europe. And then again, 10 years later, after 9/11, the same general attended the Pentagon, and there was a clear plan there of how they were going to dissect the Middle East and what countries they would take over. Libya, Syria, Iran was part of that. And of course, poor little countries like Bahrain are right in the middle of this conflict.
Well, Mitchell, what do you think about that? I mean, the thing is that, as I spoke with Kate earlier, is that the West really wants to control what is called the Arab Spring because they want to have pliant regimes. Okay, they're willing to let their dictators go because it's better to rule through a democratic system that appears to be democratic, but as long as it's friendly to the West, as long as oil is delivered to the West, it's the right kind of regime there under a different flavoring. You don't call it a dictatorship anymore. You call it a friendly Western democracy that happens to be Arab.
Well, I think the problem is, firstly, to bring it back a little bit to Bahrain, Bahrain is not a major oil-producing country. So I think that the oil argument is really out of the question when it comes to Bahrain. When it comes to the other states, and I think it's important for us to get out of this kind of archaic discourse about, the East versus the West, or the conspiracy theories that there have been like some kind of division of the Middle East planned and pre-planned, because all it does is it absolves responsibility from those people, firstly, who are acting within the state. So if we were to take the example of Libya, by suggesting that the West just wants to open up, Libya and take over to create a pliant regime, what you're really doing is undermining the legitimacy of those people who fought against Gaddafi, not just in the last 12 months, but in the last, 40 years. And so I think that in a bid to do them justice, I don't think that these kind of discourses are appropriate. Yes, there is a degree of national interest from external actors, just like large powers have always had interest in states beyond their frontiers. I think that is the way international relations actually works. But to discredit any kind of...
We've seen a great deal of very, very significant intervention from the West into the Middle East. The very two clear examples which were absolutely fundamental was the Western intervention in Iraq in the 1960s, and then, of course, the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, both of which absolutely fundamentally shaped what took place there. And those, of course, were centred around the question of oil, but also strategic interests in the Cold War period. And I think, although
yes,
I totally agree that the people are autonomous actors, and that's the mistake that we could make if we don't consider that the Arab peoples do have their own agenda and their own aspirations, nevertheless, foreign powers are very, very powerful and have shaped the nature of the regimes in those countries.
Correct.
I think we can't escape from that fact.
Okay, Peter, did you want to jump in there? Because it was all agreed is that the Cold War is over, but there is a new enemy, and that's called Iran. And that's how we started the second part of this program here, is that Iran plays a very important role in here because there is the competition over Bahrain, and I agree it's not a major oil exporter, but its geographical position is very important when it comes vis-a-vis Iran and in Saudi Arabia. And then we have it broader out with the sanctions and the drumbeat of war against Iran. So it is internationalized, very much so.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to correct the statement on Bahrain. Yes, of course, there is not a lot of oil wealth there, but what is vitally important is it is an oil export terminal. I was based there for a considerable length of time, and it's vitally important geopolitically for that to be stable. So the West has a very strong interest in that. We come back to Iran. I've spent, again, some considerable time in Tehran, 6 weeks of late. I can't see any issues there because even whilst I was there, unknown forces tried to blow up two of the nuclear scientists. One was killed, the other one got away with it. There's intimidation on all sides. What you have to understand is the meltdown of the financial world was created, as I said, from the New World Order. All these countries are victim to that. High unemployment, those that even are employed in poverty, and there's not a fair distribution of wealth. So the people take to the streets, which you would expect. This is not for regime change, this is just their way of protesting. But then at this vulnerable time, the West have their own infiltrators, their secret forces, special services, Mossad, CIA, MI5, all then infiltrate into the system and stir the crowd up. They even provide snipers sometimes to take the odd innocent victim, and then the crowd then turn against the government. This is all orchestrated from the West. Please understand this. I have the evidence, and General Clark.
Well, I mean, you could say,
this.
okay, Peter, you could. That's one theory right there. But I think it's undeniable that Saudi Arabia made it very clear to the United States and its Western allies that they're going into Bahrain, if you like it or not. We are going in there because we see it as a threat to our security. Because I can remember the reactions coming out of Western capitals, and it was just more red-faced than anything else. They didn't like the idea, the way it was done. Okay, but I mean, maybe in a broader scheme of things, you're right. What do you think about that, Mitchell? Because it shows the clout that the Saudis have when it comes to its neighborhood.
Well, there you have your answer. It's not external forces pushing into Saudi Arabia. It's Saudi Arabia defining its own national interests. It's Saudi Arabia and Iran which are competing with each other for some type of regional hegemony. On the other side of the Middle East, you have Egypt and Turkey as well. And there has been this kind of miniature great game which has unfolded between these countries as they try to find their own national security interests, their objectives, and basically to stand on their own 2 feet. In this way, and you can see that the Obama administration was I wouldn't say necessarily red-faced, but the Obama administration looked at the situation both in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and essentially didn't give them necessarily a green light, but did want them to sort out their own issues, which is why, to come back to it, the report is a very positive step forward. It's Bahrainis sorting out Bahrain's situation.
Okay. Kate, I'd like to go to you, the last word on the program here. Do you still see that Bahrain is still a powder keg? It could still blow up because nothing has been resolved with this report?
Yes, I think that that's certainly the case. It's my view that you can keep people down, you can repress them, you can deprive them of their rights, but that can only ever be a temporary phenomenon, and that ultimately the people of that country will have this, or do have the same aspirations for democracy as elsewhere. We can't see how that will unfold, as we can't see how it will unfold in Egypt or Syria or anywhere else. But things are in change, things are in flux, and democracy and popular representation is the way that it's going.
Okay, we'll see where it goes for the people of Bahrain. Many thanks to my guests today in London, Birmingham, and in Prague. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.